Good evening, welcome to the Select Board meeting for Monday, March 11th. Call the meeting to order at 6:31 PM. Chairman Smith will be out this evening. I'll chair the meeting in his absence. I'll get it right into session here with the review of the health safety plan policy, use of town-provided vehicles. This is a second read.
There's one comment that I have in rereading it. Under section 8, the backup cameras,
Okay.
it's the last sentence. I would recommend changing it to absent exigent circumstances, the authorized employee will conduct a walk around of the vehicle or heavy equipment to check for any obstructions or safety concerns prior to moving the vehicle or heavy equipment.
Brian, we modified the last one related to police, correct? When we added the language about backup cameras, we just did that one clause. I didn't have it readily accessible on my computer. Do you know how closely aligned this is to theirs?
I pull that up for you.
Thank you. And I don't have any concerns with the amendment. I just want to make
No,
sure,
it was
if we
spec-
have two different, we have one for all of the departments and another one for just one department, I'd like them to at least be very similar,
I
if not
agree.
the exact same.
I agree, and absent that policy in front of me when I read this,
Yep.
that was,
We did that back in December,
Yeah, it was a while ago.
and the reference reads, what it reads under the heading of routine operation, we added a subsection C, and it reads, when having to back up a department vehicle, officers, when practical, will conduct a 360-degree walk around of the vehicle. This is to ensure there are no hazards and it's safe to back up. While backing up, officers will utilize their mirrors and backup camera. If a second officer is available, he or she will assist in the backing up.
would it make sense then for that second sentence, just to start with a strike prior to and just say when practical, comma, prior to moving the vehicle?
Yeah, because that would align it, that would align the two of them.
So we're going to do when practical, comma. Okay.
And that was the only other.
That is, I didn't see, so the only question I had is under the inspection report.
Okay.
Clearly, this is designed to encompass all heavy machinery as well.
Right.
Was the idea to ensure that it's just one form, and
That was
that's
the
why it's
goal.
all encompassed?
We were trying to standardize it
Okay,
without going too far in one direction.
okay,
And this was an example that Superintendent McCrory became aware of through our work with our insurance company.
yeah. The only reason I ask is there a way, so first of all, it works the way it is, right? It encompasses that because you're only checking off, you're not asked to check all of those items, but you are asked to note any deficiencies if you come across any.
Correct.
You're not gonna, you're jumping in the admin vehicle, you're not gonna know if, you know, the radiator is up to speed,
Right.
you know. So it is fine in that sense, but I didn't know if you wanted to break that out into two different pieces and have one that says specific for heavy machinery and one for your standard vehicle check, and have them,
We could.
all vehicles, including heavy equipment, do this one, and then only the heavy equipment also are required to know anything within these, and sort of parsing them out as a secondary cursory check.
Got it.
Because it's not typical for any driver of a transit van to check all of these
Agreed.
lines and, you know, the different options. Just like you pulled out trailer, you could also have a subset for. But if it becomes too cumbersome, this draft is fine. This is only a second read. We have some time to sort of
Yep.
play around with it before the next read.
Yeah, I can work with the department heads and to make an attempt at reorganizing that, see if that meets what you're looking for.
Well, I'd like your thoughts on it too, Jim. And again, it works the way it is. So if those that are looking at it feel strongly that it just makes sense to leave it as one, and those that are looking at the things that are pertinent to them, they'll look at the things that are pertinent to them and they'll gloss over the things that are not. That's fine. I didn't have any other concern with the items. It was just the layout, the format.
Got it.
So content-wise, there's no issue with it. I don't have any problem with it.
Okay.
No, I have no objections to your suggestion. It does make sense where, you know, if, like you said, if they're driving a van that doesn't have all these additional features and, you know,
Well, I just don't want, I don't want the everyday driver to think that they have to make sure that they're getting down and checking the air lines, the drive lines, the engine, the front axle, the fuel tanks. And, you know, lo and behold, something was wrong with that axle and they didn't note it. You know, it's like, it's not, if you're driving a regular old, you know, daily driver,
Right.
it's not your prerogative to know that that's specifically for heavy machinery. So if we could parse those out, that would be great, those that are specific to heavy machinery. And again, if it becomes too cumbersome,
Well, I'll give it a shot.
leave it like it is.
Yep.
We'll bring it back for a third read next week.
Yes, sir.
The next is the excavation and trenching,
Right.
second read.
I can find my notes here. I can read what I wrote. Won't be
Sure.
good.
Glenn, I did have a question for you, if you don't mind. Sure. I know in the policy, it indicates that if you're going with the assumption of type C soil, it's, you know, which is the most, you know, you're going to have to plan the most for as far as safety. Do we typically just do that? Is that the easiest one, or are we going through and testing and
We're not testing, we're just assuming.
when I read that, I thought most of the things that I've seen, most of the job sites are just assume it's type C, save the time on the testing, and take the full precautions under type C.
Yes,
Okay, I just, for my own clarity, I wanted to double check.
yep, assume the worst case.
Yeah.
So,
Go for it, sir.
Section 4C, the last sentence says, complete the daily inspection worksheet in Appendix A to show site conditions have been evaluated. I'd recommend adding the beginning of that sentence to read, the designated competent person shall complete. So that there's indication, and it sort of, it's consistent with what is further down in the policy language, but just to identify who it is that's responsible for completing that inspection.
Okay.
Did you have anything else on this one?
Yeah. Same thing, the second sentence in section 5B, where it starts, record these results on the daily inspection worksheet. I'd like to identify who's responsible for doing that, which would be the designated competent person.
So I was reading all 4C and then again on 5B. I mean, it does refer to the first sentence is the competent person must conduct. And then, so, I mean, if it's referring back to record these results, I don't know if you want to just make that a long sentence, you know, and record these, because that ties it to the competent person that's actually doing the work rather than two sentences.
Some preference?
No, either way.
I'm okay with extending the sentence and, you know, to comma and include,
It's just,
or,
yeah.
and record the results. Just reading that second sentence, it just seemed like kind of fragmented and
Who's
sort of
assigned to it?
sitting there like, okay, well,
Right. Okay, I'll make those changes.
fortunately, current day, we have people who are competent and responsible, but 5 years, 15 years from now, someone's going to say, well, I don't know. It says they had to do it, but it didn't say who had to do it.
Yeah.
So, you know, someday, Glenn and everybody present in the department are going to retire. So, and that's all I had. Other than that, everything reads fairly well, and
My only ask is on the, and it's just a formatting, and it might be because of the way it was transferred into a PDF for our packet,
Okay.
but the daily inspection worksheet,
Okay.
if we could keep that on a front and back, 2 pages, because it goes to a third page where you sign off, name, inspection, name, signature, at least on mine. I don't know if it does on,
Oh, yeah, good catch. Yes, we will
just a
get that back
formatting,
onto a
yeah,
second
we-
page.
pull that up into a 2-page.
I thought I got that solved before when we were formatting, but I'll fix that.
Yeah. I don't have anything else for that one. Thank you for those edits, Jim. We'll bring it back for a third read.
Okay.
We'll move on to the surplus equipment request, public library, second read. I apologize, I did not reach out to the library to ask. Do you know if they had reached out to the elementary school
I
related
did
to?
make that request. The director was doing that for us.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So we just haven't heard back yet whether or not
Correct.
anybody wants it. Okay.
And then Jake wanted IT to be informed of serial numbers and all of that
Yes.
for the equipment, and that's been sent over.
Okay.
Yep.
So we'll know more, hopefully, for the third read.
Correct.
I didn't have any other concerns with that request, did you, Mr. Lynn?
no, I have no concerns.
Okay. We'll bring that one back next week. We've still got a few more minutes before the joint. Jump down to meeting minutes.
I didn't have March 13th.
Yeah, I noticed that we had
February 5th is
February
there?
5th is in there. I'll make a motion to approve meeting minutes from February 5th, 2024 as written.
I will second that.
Any discussion, edits, amendments?
As read.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
We have a first read on the surplus property equipment request from Recreation. And this is for the tennis courts and the fence at Veterans Field.
Correct.
The only comment I had, do you have any other information on that outside of the,
I can explain what I understand their request to be. I know that they've been meeting with Superintendent McCrory on this. The Recreation Commission, obviously, as you know, is planning for a complete renovation of the park. The dugouts are no longer being used, and the tennis courts haven't been used in a few seasons. The cracks and other deficiencies have made them more of a hazard. And so, and as you may recall, about 3-4 years ago, the playground had to come out. So there's not much left there. In a conversation with the Building and Grounds Department, there was a conversation about prepping it for the season, loaming and seeding, smoothing out that area. And there was a conversation about maybe removing these structures because they're going to be replaced anyhow.
correct?
And just loaming and seeding everything at once.
Yep.
So that's the genesis of this request.
Yeah. So I didn't have any, I understood, based on the conversation that we heard from Jackie Boyden and the other rec members, Eric, I think, was here, and they talked about an ongoing plan for Vets Field.
Right.
Scrapping the fence, is it in, Glenn, you would know this, is it in poor enough condition that it's not reusable for a third party?
No, I would not.
Okay.
I would not try.
I
to
haven't
use
looked at it, and so somebody who's seen it up close and who's, inspected it, I didn't know if it would have any value at all, or is it on there as scrap because of the poor
It's
condition?
been in there scrap, it's because of the condition.
Okay.
It's been up and down twice already,
Yeah,
and once you start stretching them and re-stretching them, it just causes damage to them.
okay,
And it's probably more work to try to reuse it.
sounds
than it would
good.
be just to get rid of it.
Thank you, sir.
Now, Glenn, if I may ask, the court surface, is that just being,
It's being dug out and be hauled away to a vendor that takes the asphalt
okay, so
for recycling it.
that was my reclamation?
Yeah, we're just going right down to the gravel base of it, and then everything would just get graded out and loamed and seeded. It's not fixable.
No, I was just wondering about, does it just end up in a landfill somewhere, or can it be recycled and,
Yeah, oh yeah, it'll definitely go to one of the recycling plants. They'll grind it back up and put it into their mixes. Yeah.
is there a cost to us to have them remove it, or?
We're gonna be removing it.
Okay.
We're gonna be removing the fence, we're gonna be removing the asphalt and trucking it ourselves. So that was the other reason why it was brought up to do that. That we can do that part to save the town some money, to save the rec some money on their future project. So they're gonna be paying for the loam if there is a rented piece of equipment, which I don't believe there's gonna have to be. But they'll pay for the loam and the trucking and then whatever the costs are to get rid of that material.
Thank you.
Did you have any other questions related to the second one, which was the dugouts and the fence around that one? I've seen the dugouts up close. They're pretty bad.
They were pretty bad when
15 years ago.
when my kids were playing, they were pretty bad, and they were all in their 20s now, so.
Yeah, okay.
There was a comment that they may be used for training for the fire department.
Fire department.
I've
Potentially.
had some preliminary conversations with the fire department to talk about whether or not that's even an option. I know that maybe in past years, there would be a training exercise that could be scheduled, and towns don't do as much of that anymore, so I don't know if chief and captain have had a further conversation with rec or not, but they were looking into that option. If not, we would dispose of them like we would any other type of bulky material.
Yeah. All right. Well, those were first reads, so they'll be back
Yep.
next week anyways. We've got about 10 minutes. Quickly want to jump down to the last item,
Okay.
because I think it'll be an easy one to go through. And that's the Route 2 sidewalk, wastewater road to Erving Paper Mill. the resurfacing project that's about to go underway.
Right. So we have the resurfacing project, we have the reconstruction project. There's going to be some overlapping work there. The design team with MassDOT, and these are all MassDOT projects, so we are just partners because Route 2 is our main street,
Right.
so they do include us. And we're going to be the ones to help organize the community sessions where residents can come and talk. So we were invited to a recent conversation about some of the challenges the designer's having with the layout. It's not going to be a mystery to anybody that the layout is so narrow in certain sections that you're stuck between ledge and a wetland. And they have to be able to try to squeeze out 2 travel lanes, a 5-foot shoulder, and accommodations on either side. So this is a section that's very narrow. The existing sidewalk is 3 feet maybe,
Yeah, it's just about 4.
and it's in very poor condition. The surface is cracked, vegetation's coming through it. So we are unable to do anything to try to help MassDOT maintain it. MassDOT does not really come out and maintain their sidewalks, and there's no other abutter on this property except the railroad. Glenn tried a few times to try to keep it clear, and we just couldn't do it safely. So MassDOT has asked, is this being used? We've spoken to the owners of Stoneville, we've spoken to the owners of the paper mill. Both entities have said that their customers and their employees do not use it. They recall decades ago it was used, but it's not anymore. So they don't see a need for it. So now MassDOT has turned to us to say, as the town, in support of asking for it to be removed, with the caveat that all of this has to go through the Access Control Board. They may say because it exists, it must continue to exist. If that's the case, MassDOT will have to reconstruct somehow.
Right.
I think we've had enough conversations in-house that it's not a structure that the town can be involved with maintaining. But if the state is going to keep it, we need them to make sure it's passable and safe. But if there's an option to remove it, we don't see it serving a purpose currently to any of our residents or our businesses.
Yeah, so my thoughts on it when I read that are, clearly we're not the deciding factor. It's just whether or not we
Correct.
object to them even asking.
That's the question.
And the fact that the only 2 potential entities that would use it or have patrons that utilize it are saying they have not used it in decades and have no foreseeable need to use it. I don't see the concern with moving forward with asking
Okay.
for it to be abandoned and
Okay.
removed during the reconstruction process. And if that gets denied, then it's on Mass DOT to
Correct.
restructure their project to include a proper, probably a 5-foot, which means a whole big old project on that narrow stretch of road there,
Right.
or a variance for a 5-foot sidewalk. And
Right. Right.
No, I mean, I do know there were people, residents from Erving Center that at a time would walk to the mill, to and from for work, but present day, the increase in vehicle traffic and
Right.
not to play on words, but Route 2 being stuck between a rock and a wet place.
Seriously.
I would much rather have no sidewalk than an unsafe one.
And I think from a town priority standpoint, one thing that we're desperately in need of are the 5-foot shoulders. If a vehicle becomes incapacitated or there's a traffic stop or any of the other reasons that you need those safe shoulders, we have none. It's literally, you can see the white line, it's less than a foot from the sidewalk.
yeah, and part of that I was thinking in their consideration is, can it be wide enough for, potential bike lane or anything like that?
And that's part of their consideration.
Right.
So, okay. I can give that feedback back to the design team and the MassDOT project manager.
Right.
And there would, if there were residents, there'd be public hearings for them to voice their.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, this is so preliminary at this stage, it hasn't even made it to what they call 25%.
Yeah, it's
And there will be public hearings at that stage, absolutely.
so you'll notify them that
I
we're
can convey
okay
that
if they
to them.
want to make that request.
Absolutely.
Review of potential annual town meeting warrant request. Thank you for putting that together, Brian.
Yeah, hopefully it was somewhat straightforward.
Yeah. It didn't have any concerns with the ones that are on there, other than they're still works in progress and we're not ready to, say that they're the town code being one of them.
Right.
We're going to discuss that later on this evening. I'm not going
Right.
to have time to dive into town code in the next 5 minutes
Of course.
before we go into our joint session.
Right.
But the requests all make sense. The multi-year agreements, if those are coming up, unless we're saying we're doing something completely different and we're not engaging
Right.
at all, a 10-year commitment makes sense on those.
So should I plan to draft out those articles for
I
the
would,
annual?
yeah, I would plan to
Okay.
draft them out, and then we can tweak through the language
Yep.
as they're presented.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Did the conversation about the PD parcel make sense?
It did.
Yes.
I've been following the email back and forth with that one. Yeah,
Something got lost.
something got lost about, what was it, 1930s or
It
something?
was in the
Say-
1930s.
Yeah.
Almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, and we've just sort of followed it since then.
Right. I don't know if the three of you will decide that you want to address that at annual or a future one, but it is something that we would probably want to address and end up with the clean title to.
Yeah, well, if we're looking at, opening up that area for use,
Right.
we're going to have to get it cleaned up,
Right. Right.
so.
Back in the day when you could refer to the tree or to the brow of something, those
Yeah.
references become vague over time, and so clear meets and bounds, which I didn't include that in this article. I have clear meets and bounds for everything described there
Okay.
from the surveyor, so we can be very precise about what we're talking
All
about.
right, that sounds good. Well, I don't have any concern with those. Like I said, if you want to draft those up, we can,
Okay.
when we start looking at the actual warrant,
Okay.
we can look at the language as it's drafted and we can tweak, amend, remove if we're not ready,
Right.
all of that.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Feel free, the joint meeting's going to start in 2 minutes. We have one other item, but I'm not going to venture into it for 2 minutes. It's talking about town code. We won't get through town code in 2 minutes.
We don't have a capital quorum,
Okay.
so should I go home?
You can come and discuss anything you want to discuss. You just can't vote on it as a capital planning committee member. That is up to you. Dan's here. I saw him a second ago. He must have come in and stepped back out, so you at least have that quorum.
He's elusive.
Here if you want. Or not.
Good evening.
Dan, do you mind when the, like, that usually does? Sure, around there, I'll only turn it up. There you go, now you look important.
You've always been important, Dan.
Thank you.
There's also under the weather, or?
People are dropping like flies.
You guys can discuss that in 1 second, because I'm going to call the joint meeting of the Finance Committee, Capital Planning Committee, to review the FY25 operating and capital budget requests, but specifically capital planning requests this evening.
I'd like to make note that we don't have a quorum for capital planning here,
So,
and that our leader for the financial committee is not here. So I'd like to take a vote amongst our folks as to whether I'd like to nominate Dan to be the chair of the finance committee for this evening. Is there a second? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
all right. So in case you need any votes or anything, you can call those motions. Would you like to go over the capital requests and give a brief overview of the decisions made by the capital planning committee? And
Does this have everything from our meeting on Thursday with respect to the police and,
The only one that I do not see included on this is the fire request. It was the request that was discussed about Jaws of Life. Is that what the term is?
Yeah.
No, that is on there.
Am I missing it?
10. Under recommended requests.
I don't see a 10.
see, mine only goes through 9.
Mine goes to
Yeah,
Mine only
I have
goes to 9.
This is what takes it.
There's an updated version?
That's the updated version.
That's the updated version.
Deb sent
Let me
that.
make copies for everybody.
Okay. We will pause for a moment while you address that. Yeah.
Oh, good thing I came today.
Are you sure you don't want to come up?
No, I mean, I think it should be noted that there is no quorum for the capital, and so as such, I will be a member of the audience. And correct you when you're.
Yeah. Linda didn't want to come up and sit with us.
If you want to start with the.
I was going to
the-
say, I think that's the only thing that's.
Start with the
that's gonna
first
be
one,
different.
it's the
Yeah.
bottom one. Brian can, catch up when he gets back in here.
Okay, sure.
Go for it.
All right. Oh, there he is right there. Speak of the devil. So the Capital Planning Committee met last week with the department chairs to give them a preview of what we had gone over for capital planning items, items that we're going to recommend, items that we're not going to recommend, and kind of a reason why as to we did and did not. Thought the meeting went very well. We actually got a good deal of information from them about how to improve the process and what we could do differently. So all in all, I thought it was a pretty good meeting. So let me go over the recommended items that we have so far to this point.
Thank you.
IP mill demolition, $4,600,000 grant, $3.4 million remaining. Committee recommends moving forward with this request. At this time, the committee feels a debt exclusion should be sought within a 3-year term. If the one-time debt exclusion is unsuccessful, then we recommend auction of the property. This is what we discussed at the last Board of Selectmen meeting, as I recall. That was number one. Number two, update rec and open space plan, $25,000. This plan needs to be current to apply for things such as the park grants, expires in 2025. There is some grant funding that may be available, though we would need upfront costs for it. Number three, plow truck replacement, $100,000. Due to rust, rot, temporary repair, this would fall under a safety concern. Number four, IT computer replacements, $35,000. This would update 13 computers. Number five, feasibility study, Vets Field, $45,000. $45,000. Committee agrees that this should move forward. The committee expressed concern based on other capital requests received about having several large projects, i.e. water tower, Zelinski Field overhaul, going on at one time. We'll revisit Rec's plan for upcoming fiscal years if a successful park grant is obtained. Just a little more information about that. We got information from the committee, and we were just expressing our worries that they seem to have a pretty stringent, this comes here, this comes here, this comes here, and we're worried if something falls through that we could end up with 1 year where they're expecting everything to be done, and it would be just very expensive and an untenable thing to do. So we just wanted to make sure that they understood that we're only going to be looking at one thing at a time. We're not planning on working on all three parks at the same time. So if, just to let them know that that was our views on it. I'm sure they would talk to the Board of Selectmen if they didn't like our ideas, but that was just what we told them. Number six, POTW number one, fencing, $63,600. This is a DEP requirement. Number seven, senior housing matching funds, $448,188. Committee supports moving forward with the senior housing project, and this request, the exact source of funding of funds still needs to be determined. Number eight, Care Drive Pump Station, $1 million. This is needed for senior housing. The exact source of funding is yet to be determined. It's my understanding that both of those will be receiving funding for, but we just don't know the levels of it yet. The Hazard Mitigation Plan, $25,000. This is expiring soon and needs to be current for any grant opportunities. Number 10, Vehicle Extraction Equipment. Our fire chief came to us during the meeting and said that he'd like to replace the existing extraction equipment because it was old and it was a safety concern, and we thought that it was worthwhile to add it onto the list. And let's see, hold over additional funding requests. We had already asked for funding for security for the police department. This is for cameras and locks and the whole 9 yards. But when they went and asked the folks who were doing the work for us if they could give us a quote for the school, I don't know the exact wording of how it went, but one way or another, if we were to add the school onto it, it only ended up being an extra $20,000 or $30,000 more than what we would do if we did just the police department alone. Okay. So we decided that it would be a good thing just to add the $20,000 or $30,000 and add the school onto this bid as well. And we had already put away $100,000 for that, and we were going to put, this was asking us to add an additional $165,000. Do you want me to go through the non-recommended requests?
Yeah, if you
as
don't
well?
mind,
Sure,
we'll
no
finish it
problem.
off. Thank you.
Things that were submitted but we did not accept for this year. Animal control van for $36,000, $10.44. Cemetery creation of new or expansion. This was primarily here because there was no money associated with it at this point. We didn't know how much or what money to attach to it. Shared use feasibility study for $34,000. 2015 F-550 dump truck replacement for $125,000. I believe our highway folks told us that if we gave them one of the vehicles, that they didn't need both vehicles, and they were willing to push back one on us. The Pearlby Care Building, $10,000. PD Cruiser replacement for $71,894.40. And the library lighting controls, we decided to take this out because we didn't feel that it was a capital expense and that it should be an operating expense.
Thank you, sir.
You are welcome, sir.
So looking at the totals at the bottom, and then looking at the explanation and the of each of the line items for the recommended requests, it states that you're looking to go forward with and supporting the senior housing matching funds and the Care Drive pump station, because those are both required for that project to move forward. But on the totals on the bottom, you showed a caveat of without senior housing, and I'm wondering what prompted that conversation to look at the totals without it, because if you're in support of going forward, then we should be looking for earmarking at least a portion of, because I know a lot of that we're going to do in-kind service for the matching for the 448. There's grants available for some of that 448, and we can chip away at that, if not all of it. I don't know where we're at. Brian, maybe you could tell me about the earmark for the pump station. There's no...
The grant portal is just opening
Right.
for expressions of interest. We're going to be starting in that process. If everybody's in agreement that these projects can go forward, that will look at the pump station, that will look at the road infrastructure. It won't be until June until the final application's accepted, and then we'll know this summer if they're being approved. And then we have a few other grant sources or state appropriation opportunities that we can pursue if we know that these projects are ones that we can move forward on.
Right.
So we don't have the full mix, to Ben's point, put together, but zeroing in on the number that we're searching for and prioritizing the projects that we want to pursue that funding for will allow us to do the next step.
So is the recommendation that we are solely looking at alternate sources of funding for that? Because those are large ticket items. You're about almost 1.5 million just for that portion of it, the pump station and the... if those other funding sources, is the recommendation from the capital planning, if those fall through, is the recommendation that the project is no longer supported? Is it contingent on? I didn't know if that conversation happened at that level.
It did not, at least to my knowledge, it did not, or I don't recall it.
Okay.
And frankly, I would say that since the capital planning committee is not here,
Yeah.
that I'm not going to speak for the capital
That's
planning
fine.
committee.
Okay. Still trying to pull together some thoughts. Mr. Lloyd, if you have any comments, questions.
Yeah, it's funny how you look at things and different eyes see things. When I saw the totals at the bottom, without the IP mill and senior housing, that number is roughly 10% of the total. And what sort of jumped out at me is that, you know, trying to be very conservative in where and how we're spending our money. Now, obviously, these big ticket items, they're important, the mill being what it is, and senior housing has been something the town's been working on for quite a long time. Some would argue long overdue, but you know, aside from those two big ticket items, I think the committees have been really mindful of what the community has said
Yeah.
about our spending and about taking on large numbers of projects and operating. So, yeah.
Yeah, we took
There's
that to heart.
obviously a lot of thought that's gone into this and careful, and some department heads, Mr. McCrory here tonight, saying, okay, well, yeah, ideally, replacing the two vehicles would be good, but we can push it out. Police department's going to get a cruiser to maybe limp along for one more year and squeeze every last drop out of it, so.
And I also know that, well, I don't know, I will speak for myself. I will not speak for the capital planning committee. We're also looking at a vehicle replacement policy that we're not 100% completed with at this point, but by what we saw for numbers for the police cruiser, it looked like it could go another year. I think that our replacement policy is going to drive that decision more going into the future. It's kind of a points way of looking at things that's based on, mileage, how much money was put into it, a whole bunch of different variables. And I mean, we're also trying to tie in the highway department vehicles, the fire department vehicles, so it's not just one list that you can throw something into. It's a much bigger discussion.
And it really gets to the longevity of the equipment. For many years, it was, we had an arbitrary number, and every 4 years, get a new one.
Get to
and-
7 years, you get a new one.
Yeah, or every 7 years, or whatever, and so I appreciate the task of going through and saying, let's really look at how long we're keeping it. And I think part of that is, for years, we would get rid of our old equipment, unusable in our eyes, and then other municipalities would run it for 10 more years.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
calls into question how, our matrix of our decision-making, and how long those vehicles can last. We don't have the confirmed numbers. Brian and I were chatting before the meeting. We're gonna do another walkthrough and second and third set of eyes to really look at the totality of the requests. Now that we have the capital presented this evening, we'll fold that in. We'll have the full operating and capital outlook for all the requests and recommended capital improvements and how those align with the revenue sources that we know to date. There will be a deficit, so we're going to have to try and figure out how to balance that. I don't know what that deficit will look like. It could be $500,000, could be $1 million, depending on how you play with what you're trying to earmark funds for and what you're. The reason I asked a question about the, say the pump station is, if you're saying, if we as a town are saying, at all costs, we want to do this project, and we understand that we're going to have to search for grant funding, federal, state aid, whatever we can to get this done, but if that fails, what's our next funding source? And is that capital stabilization? Is it general stabilization? Is it an override? I do have some concern with the debt exclusion override question. And I'll be very clear, not that I disagree with the stance, I wholeheartedly agree with the stance. I have concern that the title alone, debt exclusion, 2.5, Proposition 2.5 override, after the dynamics that played out at the last town meeting related to an override, I don't want to see other really viable, vibrant, capital projects and expenditures that are needed get muddled up. So we have to be very careful about the way we craft this and whether or not this needs to be a separate article, separate day even. I'm not sure. So, but I agree with the synopsis of we've gone through this process enough times in the last, 10 years or more of trying to RFP this building, come up with costs to demolish it. If this one fails, I wholeheartedly agree. Maybe there's a contractor out there that doesn't want to be stymied by doing the RFP process, but wants to just put in a lowball bid, buy the property, and maybe their demolition cost might be a lot less. if they're doing the work themselves and they're not paying somebody else to do it, I'm sure that that cost is a lot less for somebody else to do it. So, who knows? Maybe we have to figure out how to craft that. We can all chat about that when the time comes. But for tonight, I wasn't planning on going through and start. I'd like the chair to be here when when he's able to attend again, and really be part of that conversation about how are we balancing, prioritizing the requests that were made, both on the operating and the capital, and where we stand. And by next meeting, we should have a better picture about the deficit we're facing. So,
And also on the good side, I mean, both the chair and Deb are in the capital planning
Yes.
committee, so they're well aware of what we
Yep.
discussed, so.
yep.
They're not missing anything.
No, I'm fully aware of that. So, but when it ties into the full picture of the operating budget, I'd like to have a full complement of everybody here to really engage in that conversation fully.
Yep.
So hopefully everybody can be available next Monday. We can go through that. If there's nothing else related to the capital or any other questions that popped up, we don't have anything from operating being presented tonight, but if there was anything that popped up since the last meeting, we could entertain that now. Otherwise, I would adjourn the joint meeting. We still have a little bit more to work on with town code. You're welcome to hang out and talk town code.
One thing that I'd like to bring up before we leave, because we had our meeting dealing with capital planning with all the department heads, and one thing that came out of that you might be interested in is there were a couple of departments that felt the timing wasn't long enough. And one of the things we discussed in the meeting is maybe it's like a two-tiered timing where some departments will get up to 25 or 30 minutes and some departments
that
will be
timing.
at 15
Okay,
minutes.
thank you.
So that we can tag the two together in a night so that we have a couple of short ones and one or two
Yep.
long ones. But yeah, some of the short ones didn't last to 15, some of the long ones felt pushed.
Yep, that makes sense. This was the first year of trying
Yeah,
to
that's what we said.
put placeholders for time limits. I think in the overall scheme, I really like the way the chair, laid those out, and that's great feedback of knowing that the best guess on some of those departments, maybe we need to tweak those for future budget discussions. Thank you.
Good feedback.
Before you adjourn, could I just say, I don't want to waste my opportunity here as the chair of this committee.
Let me get comfortable for this one, Dan. I want to hear that.
Just a couple words for folks. There could be people watching this who watch all the time. Could be some who seldom watch, and as the budget comes along, more people will want to watch. They'll be interested. It's their money. What are you doing with it? And it's like to point out, we do have a capital planning committee of 5 people, and they look at things throughout the year. What do we need this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years down the road? When are we going to need a roof? When are we going to need a fire truck? These big ticket items. What is it, over 5,000 or 10,000?
5,000.
That we look at. They look at that and recommend and work with department heads as to determine what do they recommend. And the General Finance Committee, there's 4 of us at the moment, looks at more like the operating budgets the departments submit. What do they need for the police, the fire, the highway, that kind of stuff. So we all work together, and working as a team with a select board and administrator that keeps things together, it keeps it all organized for us. It's a team, and we're not working for us, we're working for you. Whether or not you agree with what we recommend, it's up to you. That's why we have an open town meeting. It's your money, and we just recommend what we think is financially the best option. And I think that's as few words as I can come up with. Thank you.
Yeah, I like the process of rolling operating and capital for each department together. This is the first time we've done that, and I think it worked out really well this year.
Yeah. So we've got 2 back-to-back placeholder meetings, both the next subsequent Mondays, the 18th and the 25th. So, and we'll see where we stand after the 18th about, having more rigid numbers and what we're looking at. I'm optimistic we'll make headway, but I am not so optimistic that we'll finalize it in one meeting. So we'll probably need both meetings for that, I'm sure.
We should be able to, I gave everybody a copy of the revenue projections again. I'm not anticipating any changes. So those are pretty solid. The only update I need to make is from the January 31st special town meeting. We made some transactions, so we just need to make that last revision. But we're gonna go back through all the requests one more time, make sure that we have a decent understanding of the summary of requests. What does that look like in terms of expenses to projected revenues? And we should have that for your next meeting. And then for capital, we can put together that funding matrix that we normally do every year, take the recommendations and start plugging them into different funding sources so that you all can start working on your strategy for the 18th.
Yep. Ben, is there an upcoming capital meeting again as a standalone, or are you, at this point,
I
all?
don't think we have one scheduled for the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
I'm aware of.
The only thing I was going to say is if you meet again, even if it's not related to FY25, future requests, based on this year's process, I would ask that there's some discussion about like the actual capital planning, capital management bylaw and policy and the process that we go through.
It's on
and
our
all of that, yeah.
list of things to discuss.
And also, it came into question about something not meeting the threshold for the $5,000 threshold. And I would, just like we said when we upped the clothing allowance from 250 to 500, because 250 in today's market doesn't buy you a whole lot, nor does 5,000. So I don't know if that threshold is still an adequate one. It might be,
Yep.
but just to think about that, because a $5,000 capital project isn't a whole lot of a project.
Right. Yeah, in this case in particular, it wasn't just the 5,000. It was the relearning how to use the lights.
Yeah, that was more of a maintenance.
So
Yeah, I
that's-
saw that one. But in the discussion, there was another one that said it might only be like 3,700. And we're like, that's not even capital. It didn't make it onto this list. I think it was pulled off ahead of that before it even went to you, because it was that idea that it didn't meet the threshold. And it got me thinking, is that threshold still an adequate threshold or not?
Yeah.
And I don't know if, it might be, but just a question to ask.
Definitely.
Thank you, sir. Anything else while we still have the joint meeting?
Since Dave's
Questions,
the chairman,
comments?
he's got to stay.
I will make a motion to adjourn the joint meeting of the Finance Committee and Capital Planning Committee and continue the Select Board meeting. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. Objections? Extensions? You all have a great evening.
Thank
You're welcome to stay and stick around. We do have one more item we're going to talk about.
You only do it once. You learn after that, yeah.
All right. Town code.
Clear as mud, huh?
Clear as mud. All, what is it,
406 pages.
406 pages. Even longer if you go into the
It's misleading.
tracked version, which I started to go through.
Am I looking at the wrong thing? Because mine says 309. Where am I off here?
I'm not sure.
Should have been titled Erving Preliminary Draft.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the red line copy of it. Maybe
Okay, that's probably it. I think the other one just has the table of contents and a few
Yeah,
things in
it's
the
got a
front.
few other things, yeah.
Okay.
Would it be helpful if I just give context for what this is?
Yeah.
Yes.
As the newbie, I would appreciate that.
Absolutely. Either 2018 or 2019,
Somewhere around
Town
there.
Clerk Newton came to the voters and asked for funding to do a project called the Town Code. It is a process where you take all of the bylaws on the books, take an opportunity to look them all over, update them, put them into a chapter and section format. So to date, we've had 180 years of voting in a bylaw, and they're on scraps of paper, they're in books, they're all over the place. And so his predecessors and he have done their best to cull through all those town meetings, capture all of those votes, and we've got Word documents and PDFs and all of those. And so this was a project to take all of that, put it into an actual format that you can actually reference, bring that back to the voters. We started that work in 2019, not assuming that a pandemic would happen, and the work of adopting bylaws depends on the type of bylaw that you're working on. So zoning, for instance, was finished last June, but that was a very long 1.5 year process just to touch the zoning bylaw. So we're finally at a place where that's done. And when we adopted that, that was adopted as part of the town code. Even though you see it put in this draft, we don't need to touch that again because the voters have already voted that in a chapter and section format that aligns with the proposed town code. That was intentional. So the rest of this are the bylaws that the select board and town clerk Newton have probably spent, it's been about a year since you last looked at it.
Yeah.
But you had already spent several meetings working with the town clerk. I think you had 3 meetings where you just read through them all and gave him feedback. He brought all of that back to the vendor. They worked on drafts. And this is the draft that they are asking for final review and consideration if you're ready to take it to town meeting. I did meet with him today because there's a formatting concern that came to my attention. If you go to the zoning bylaw, we have it adopted where a section, it's chapter 230. So chapter 230, say section 1, subsections, the formatting is 230-1.1, 1.2, 1.3. If you revise that bylaw in the future, you can just add the next decimal, right? To expand that section if necessary. If instead, and I'll use boards and commissions as an example, if you go to chapter 9 and you look at some of the boards and commissions, if you start like on page 15, you will see that the sections go numerically in order and they don't use that decimal formatting. And my concern is if you went back to say,
It's not expandable.
you can't expand it.
Yeah.
What they
And
would
it's-
do is add decimals now.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's gonna make sense for your format.
I don't think so. And that logic is the same reason we have spaced out even our policy numbering. So
capacity.
that it's capacity for future growth, different policies, revisions,
Right.
redactions.
Right. So I asked the vendor this morning if they could give me some guidance on what it would take to fix that structure so it matches the same structure we adopted for zoning. As you noted, it matches our policy structure.
Right.
So there may be a slight cost to just editing that out because it's time, but I think we want to get it right. And I figured you all would have a similar concern if that was brought to your attention. So they are going to work on that piece.
Okay.
The other thing that, and I think you saw this in the body of the email that Town Clerk Newton forwarded to us, it referenced some recommendations from the vendor. So the vendor puts it in this format. The vendor does a legal analysis, brings some things to our attention. So if they're aware of a change in a state statute, they already informed us in the first review that this is something that has been repealed or this is something that changed, and they would give us the reference so that we could go through with legal counsel and make our own edits. You've done most of that work. So when they took this feedback a year ago, they did another review. And so they have a few more comments for us. So one thing that they noted, there's an inconsistency in the earlier town bylaws from the zoning bylaw and say the reference to the building inspector. In one section, it may be referred to as building commissioner. In another section, it's referred to as building inspector. That can look, incongruent. They really do mean the exact same thing. The statute refers to the same position both ways. We could make that change. My recommendation to you all is leave the zoning bylaw in its current status because that process is so long. We can offer that feedback to the planning board if they're ready to make future recommendations on changes. That's something that they could bring
Yeah.
forward.
That'll be an easy one if they want to amend that
Right.
at a future town meeting.
I don't think we want to hold up this project to
No,
make
because
that
they have to
happen.
hold public hearings and they have to give timeline for
could-
that.
And then the Attorney General's process can take 6 months.
Right.
So it can be very lengthy just to get a formatting change on something that by law means the exact same thing.
Right.
But it's not that we shouldn't clean that up in the future, but I think that's an easy fix in the future.
Well, it's the same principle of the policy manual. It's a work in progress.
This is a work. This is a work in progress. This
Let's
is a
get
living
it- let's-
document.
Let's get it to the best of our ability today, and
Right.
then we'll move forward.
Right. So And then just as a reminder, because people will see this all in there, we tried to put everything that a citizen may want in terms of not only the bylaws, but rules, regulations, other parts of the code. So the first two, everything from the, chapter 1 through the 200s are your bylaws. And there's plenty of space for everybody who comes after us, if something gets adopted, to find the right house for it. Once you get to the 300s, you're into the regulations. There are regulatory bodies who have statutory authority to adopt certain rules and regulations, the Board of Health, the water commissioners, the sewer regulations, things of that nature. So those live in those documents. I'm sure that they provided us some recommendations on reformatting or some changes. All of that has been and can be forwarded to those regulatory authorities for review and adoption. That is not anything that needs to go to town meeting. And so as those regulatory boards adopt their revisions, we can put it into the town code.
Okay, so it doesn't need to go through full review.
Right. It's great if the select board wants to review and offer recommendations to those regulatory boards, we absolutely can do that. But the project can be teased apart, what needs to go to town meeting and what doesn't. And then those regulatory boards can hold their public hearings and do their work. And then the 400s are the appendices. And that's where we're putting things like our special acts, the things that we've asked the state, House, and Senate to adopt for us. It's a repository for all of those actions. There was a table of all the local adoptions that we've adopted at town meeting. So if we voted to adopt a tax abatement, there's no bylaw for that, but we should have a record somewhere that at that 1990 whatever town meeting, that was adopted by the voters, so we don't lose that. So there's another section for there. And we're also looking at adding one more appendix for all the road layouts that have been adopted or amended over time. So again, just a repository for those lists, but none of those have to go back as formal adoptions as part of the town code. They're just in the appendices. So yes, it's 400 and something pages, but there's probably a lot of the work that does not need to be revisited to have this conversation about what do you want to take to town meeting and present to the voters so that we can finally get this project close to fruition.
So clarify, so I heard you say that, and now I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When we present this, are we required to present it with all the regulations in there?
No.
No, that's, okay, so I did hear that correctly.
Yep.
We can present only those that are bylaws,
Correct.
the ones that we worked on for those 3 or 4
Correct.
meetings. We didn't work on the regulations.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I heard that, and then all of a sudden I was questioning if I heard
Right.
that correctly.
Nope.
Thank
And in going back to the zoning, when the voters adopted the zoning, we said in the vote language that this would be part of the town code, and we referred to it as Chapter 230. So it was adopted with the foreknowledge that it needs to fit into the structure. So that one should be good to go.
Okay. So then if you take out the regulations, it's 166 pages, plus some appendices that you want to have as part of that.
Right.
Okay. A little more palatable.
Right. It does feel overwhelming to see this, yes.
Yeah.
This also, if you recall, I think you were on the board, Scott, at the time, there was a debate about whether or not we would keep all the fine sections in each bylaw that has a fine or
Yeah.
enforcement section structured out, and every one of those or point back to a table in the beginning. So this does include that preference for I think it's in Chapter 1, how are the bylaws of the town enforced? So in subsequent chapters where there was a bylaw that had an enforcement structure, it should point back to.
Correct. That way you can adjust the tables without having to go to a
Right.
town meeting every time you want to change it by $5 for an enforcement fee or an application fee by
You
a
can
few
change
dollars.
one bylaw versus all of them.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. What are your concerns with next steps? I read through the email
Yep.
from Claudia, and it's clear as mud
You're right.
on some of that.
I I think the question's going to be, unless you all see, either based on any of her recommendations on things she called out, because again, we've already given her the feedback you gave the
Correct.
first time,
Yeah.
and it's been incorporated. So unless something new arose to her, I think you're in decent shape. The question is going to be more about, is this the format that you like? I've called to her attention this concern that I had, that I explained.
Yeah.
She's going to give me a price for what it would take to just make those revisions, and if you want to do that, she can make that happen for
And do
you.
we still have the funds allocated? There's enough in that?
There was a special article for
Yeah,
it.
and
Correct.
there's enough remaining balance
Correct.
to do those amendments?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the question's going to be, when do you want to bring it to town meeting? Does this make sense at annual? Does it make sense at a special? I think you can make an argument for either one. We're not proposing, other than mostly formatting, any substantive changes to the bylaws. It's simply adopt what we have today and we've got that track change version of what has been proposed for revision in the new chapter and section format.
So I'm going to reserve my recommendation on where we put it
Yep.
until we meet next week and we start pulling a potential warrant together for annual based on just budgetary items and the other items that we've already discussed. And what does that look like?
Right.
On the surface, I agree that if people are under the understanding that this is not a substantive change, it is a formatting change to put everything in one place for ease of recall.
Right.
I don't think there'll be a lot of discussion about it. There might be some questions about
Right.
the nuanced pieces of it. So I don't think the annual is going to be too problematic, but
Right.
I'd like to see what that full warrant looks like when we make that decision next week about what items are going to stay on there and what are not.
Right. I do know that when we talk to the vendor, I'm sure they've got multiple clients all trying to get to the finish line. If we have revisions and they need to factor it into their workload,
It may push us
it
beyond.
may push us to
anyways.
June.
Yeah.
So depending on what we want for
Yeah.
revisions, that could dictate how quickly we can get that draft back from her.
Okay. And I've heard people go back and forth that, special town meetings are called that for a reason. They're special items. You put these type of items on a special, and I've heard others say annual town meeting is the one that calls everybody, and if you want the most people, it should be at an annual.
Right.
You can go either way with that.
Right.
We'll see about the timing of the revisions, and when we'll see about the makeup of the standard items on the ATM warrant,
Okay.
and see where it fits in.
Right.
I'll touch base with you
Okay.
about the numbers we talked about earlier, about looking at those again, and we'll pull it together this week so we can be ready for Monday.
As we've been having this conversation, there was one more potential ATM or STM item that I'd called out weeks ago, maybe months ago at this point. The senior work-off program.
Oh yes.
The upper limit is set to 750. That was set by town meeting. It can be increased to 1,500, but that would take a vote of town meeting. I don't know if that's something that maybe for next week you all would want to
Yeah,
consider.
if you could put it on the agenda so we can discuss it again,
Okay.
put it back there.
Okay.
And when you're doing that, if you could pull in the numbers of utilization,
Yep. Yep. No problem.
Thank you.
So, on the code, my first time looking at it in earnest,
Yeah.
even the red line, 309-page document seemed a little more than I had the capacity for
Yep.
in the time, but in reading through, I came across a reference to the Commonwealth that was lowercase. And
Right.
so I found that, and then I was like, okay, well, where else? And a quick word search query came up with 42 results, and it's split about 50-50 between uppercase and lowercase.
We can
But
fix that.
in a majority of them, it looks like it's referring to the Commonwealth as a proper noun, whether of Massachusetts is following or not. So
We will fix those.
we might
Right. The other thing that you all did, and the voters adopted it when you presented at town meeting, you made an editorial bylaw that the town clerk is authorized to make
make-
non-substantive changes. So
Correct.
if it's punctuation, capitalization, things of that nature, grammatical in nature, but that doesn't change the intent or the purpose of the section. So we will do our best to clean all of that up, but for some reason we missed something like that. The voters, unless they repeal that, have given the town clerk the
I was
authorization to
gonna
make
say,
those
that doesn't even
changes.
have to come in front of us. He can just make those
Right.
changes and.
Okay.
But if we're taking this to town meeting, then I do
Correct.
want it to be correct. So we
Right.
are
No,
going to
I
go through and
just
fix
think-
it.
Yes, prior to
Said it.
annual town meeting or
Yes.
special town meeting.
Right. So
Absolutely.
we'll go through with it with the vendor, and we'll go through it with the town clerk to make sure that's clear. And I know that,
Especially if we're paying a vendor, I'd like to
absolutely,
get the correct body of work.
absolutely. I do know that obviously this project lives in the town clerk's office, though it involves all the other departments or boards or commissions that have a role in this. So I know he's done a lot to sort of pull in all that feedback and get this ready. So it's really up to Town Clerk Newton about how to present this. And so I know I'm sort of in his place right today. If it made sense to you all to have information sessions or at least offer them, we can have some events before whatever town meeting you schedule
Correct,
this for to explain it.
I think that makes sense.
Yep.
It's a lot, while I say there shouldn't be a lot of questions, anytime you put a 300-plus page document in
Of
front of
course.
somebody, there's going to be questions.
Absolutely.
Sustainability or ongoing issues with the code.
Mm-hmm.
Remind me, it's been so long since we engaged the services and started this
Yep.
project. It's been like 5 years.
Yep.
Once we close this out, have it approved, is it internal? Is it in-house? Will we be doing the updates to this as we approve new things? We're not using the vendor. We're only using the vendor to create the first document.
You can choose to do that. I think most continue an ongoing relationship. So part of this, you're going to get the bound book back,
Yeah.
which you can always open up and add new pages. So we can build from there. You also get a searchable database.
Okay.
That has like a
what they ma-
software.
And they maintain that.
They maintain that for us. They host it for us. If we need to make edits to there's a small fee. I can't remember what it is, but built into the agreement that if you need that updated, they can do that for us. But to keep that searchable feature, which I think was something that
No, it is, yeah.
That's
and
a
I wasn't
software-
sure if we were doing that internally and still keeping it searchable. I don't want to lose that function. I couldn't remember
Right.
if it was going to be a long-term
Right.
line item for operating,
Right.
that this is just a contract that we have and we're
Right.
doing it. So,
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, the thought is that we would want that database, and so we'll just update a link on the front of our website. It will just go right to that searchable database. It's all keyword, or you can go off the table of contents. So there's certain ways to navigate through there.
Okay.
Export whatever bylaw you want. So
anything else?
No, I was just going to agree. I think a public information session, at least making it available to the town so people can have the opportunity. If they take advantage of it or not, that's up to them. But
Agreed.
just with the different sentiment of some people in the town about transparency and
agreed.
all of that, we'll make it available.
Absolutely. Happy to.
All right.
I think that's enough for me to say on that until I read this a little more in earnest.
It's a lot. So we had the luxury of, at least on the first couple hundred pages through the bylaws, we got them in portions. And we got
Yes.
we got to go through portions of them. You're seeing the
You're seeing all of
culmination
it.
of
Yeah.
many meetings, and
And-
you got it at one time. We got piecemeal. Take these few sections, take these few bylaws, these,
Right.
And I fully appreciate all the work that has been put into this up to this point. And I don't see that I am going to come in asking for any radical sweeping changes to it.
I mean, the reality is bylaws are something that evolve with the voters. So
Sure.
if we get the structure in place, that doesn't mean this doesn't spur thoughts not only for the board members, but for the
Oh,
public
sure. Yeah.
about proposed changes. And then
Yeah.
we can adopt those, but we can adopt them in the code and make those revisions in
Well,
the
that's
new
the
structure.
hope. So the code is just building the structure,
Exactly.
not the bylaw. So.
Exactly.
All right. If there's nothing else, I'm going to take advantage of a short meeting with a short agenda. you have anything?
I have nothing new to add, and I will second your
Motion to adjourn with a second. All those in favor? Aye. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for watching.